Round of DLA Night. I'm really excited today because we've got Chris Duffey here, and he is the author of this new book, Decoding the Metaverse: Expand Your Business Using Web3. It's a Kogan Page book, and Chris is here to talk about it. Chris, why don't you tell people where they can get hold of you?
Well, first off, thanks, Tim, for having me here. People can find me at my website, chrisduffey.ai. Duffey, as my father always used to remind me to showcase the E a little bit. And
Yes.
Thanks for having me.
You've
set the bar high with your books, so hopefully I'm in good company.
Chris, first and foremost, this isn't your first book, is it? Or as you say in the States, it's not your first rodeo.
Yes. I have to tell you, I'd love to. These conversations with authors or fellow authors are somewhat therapeutic for me. I have to tell you, it doesn't get easier, a little more fulfilling, but
you wrote a book. You told me this. You wrote a book where your co-author was AI.
I have to admit, I feel somewhat validated. I remember 5 years ago when we were doing the initial book tour, and I was literally, very grateful to be invited to go around the world. And there was this pattern of completely blank stares in the audience that quickly turned in.
But I mean, if you launched it today, you.
Oh yeah. So I feel validated.
You were 5 years ahead of your time.
Thank you. And we are using some. I was using some. You just. That might be kind of an interesting slip. I still use the word we, meaning my co-author, which was a tapestry of AI language transformers, and myself had a conversation about AI using AI. So it was really, I think, quite indicative of what we're seeing today with some of the early successes, opportunities, but
I know.
Quite honestly, considerations as well. Then,
and I love being in the presence of people that have. I did this, but it was 5 years ago. Anyway, we're here to talk about this.
Yeah.
And I've read it. I really enjoyed it.
No, thank you.
Because I remember I read the first chapters and I'm thinking, where's this going? And then I'm like the next and it's like, okay, right. So with me not going explaining any spoilers, give people that are watching this an overview of the inspiration of what you've created in this book, because it's quite different, isn't it, from other books. I've read a lot of books about the metaverse, and this is quite different.
Yeah, well, thank you for kind of prompting that. I like to tend to take a step back before going into the technology and ultimately kind of remind people, your listeners, that at the end of the day, technology is here to amplify the human condition. And so whether we're talking about the metaverse, which is still very early on, similar to where we were 5 years or so ago with generative AI, specifically text generation, or even your book, Tim, social selling. At the end of the day, this is about amplifying the human condition. How can technology not replace us, not take away our jobs, but accelerate what we want to do? And so the metaverse is in many ways the next evolution of our current day web. And I'd like to tell the narrative of, most of your listeners, I'm sure, probably encountered Web 1, which was early 2000s. And that was, as we all know and love, kind of the website where we could ingest information. So many in the industry coined that as, talk about that as a read-only environment. Fast forward to about 2007, that's where we started to engage with a read and write-only environment, AKA the social era, with a number of the social networks coming to fruition. Next came Web 3, which was this ability to extend Web 1 and Web 2 with this notion, this vision, this promise of co-ownership, whether it be co-ownership of digital assets, of your personal data, and so on. The metaverse, up until about 24 months or so, in my mind, was very much conflated with Web3.
Yeah.
And I took a hard stance about 24 months ago to say they are in fact different. And I'm glad I took that perspective, because we're seeing that getting teased apart even more so today. They are in fact different, but they're complementary. And I think some early advocates of the metaverse took a different stance, where they said either they're one and the same, metaverse and Web3. And if you look at some early blog posts, you can see some of that. Or some other schools of thought said they are distinctly different, but we meaning the metaverse, doesn't need Web3. That's blockchain, cryptocurrency stuff over there, and it has nothing to do with a more immersive experience. My stance is they are, in fact, distinctly different, but when you combine the two, they can not only amplify individual success, business success, and societal success going forward. So that was really the premise, the point of inspiration, to help decouple some of the conflation that was going on between what is not the metaverse, and what is not Web3.
Because when I read it, and I don't know whether this is the expectation that you got from my experience, is that, just so people know, is that as you go through the book, what you do is you take each definition. So it's like a foundation course on the metaverse. And so you take something like I'm trying to find something that's not crypto, because or not gaming. Privacy concerns of MSTs and blockchain, and you basically write about that. You talk about NFT security. You talk about DeFi, which is, for those that don't know, which I didn't because I had to look down the page, decentralized finance. And what you do is that you work through, and I think that you've probably brainstormed and got every single definition, piece of jargon, hashing data, document ownership, electronic systems and trust, and you've taken every single definition that there is. You've written about it, and because it's a Kogan Page book, they insist that you always have backup data to support it. And you've gone through, and even TCP/IP, what that means, and digital fashion, and you've gone through and you've described all of those things. So it becomes a walking university. I don't know, a qualification on what the metaverse is, because you come out the end of it knowing about what's all this jargon that all these people are talking about, and you cover it. Sorry, I've got rattled on.
Oh, thank you. That's very.
That's my experience of reading the book. Does that translate to you, or have I misrepresented you?
That was the hope. So thank you for the generous response. It means a lot coming.
Right. I mean, as I said, I've read a lot of books about the metaverse, and they tend to either be crypto, blockchain related, as you say, but you've gone through everything that you could think of, gaming, entertainment around the metaverse, and you've covered it.
And Tim, I have to admit, I've been quoting something that you said when we first met a few months back. You, I think, very astutely kind of identified there's this pattern when emerging technology comes out, that quite often the vision of those technologies, specifically with Web3 and the metaverse, is all about creating a better, democratizing either society and or the technology. And there's this paradox happening, I think, with a lot of these technologies that are emerging, that they are so exclusive in the technical knowledge that is needed, that they're no longer inclusive for everyone to A, understand, and B, to utilize. So that was really the hope, the inspiration for this book, is to create a blueprint on a professional level. On a personal level, I always felt this miss in my career, that I got into the industry 1 or 2 years a little too late, and didn't have the opportunity to help architect the internet as we know it today. And so thought this was an opportunity to help architect create a blueprint for future success utilizing the metaverse. The irony to your earlier point is, much like AI and some of the other technologies, we go through these dramatic hype cycles and then somewhat of a winter. And so these boom bust cycles. And right now, AI is very much on a boom
Yes.
cycle, and the metaverse has somewhat died down. I would just offer people to take a long-term view. After 2 years of in-depth research on the metaverse, I am 100% certain that the future will involve a more immersive experience. I'm not, and quite honestly, I'm not 100% certain if the term metaverse will stick or not, but the core principles, premise of the metaverse, in my mind, I have no doubt that that will be the future for future success of businesses, individuals, and society.
I think it's a term that Neil Stevenson came up with, wasn't it, into the metaverse?
Yes.
And I think for those that don't know, it was was in one of Neil's novels. And I think even Neil is of he seems to be a highly practical person. I've never met him, but I've seen him speak, and he seems to be highly practical. And is it to say, well, if you come up with a better name, then use it?
Yeah, and he's done a bit of a blessing and a burden, a little bit on a more immersive experience, similar to what I equate to artificial intelligence as well. The term does not do either justice. Nobody likes anything artificial that I'm aware of. And so just the pure branding of AI is somewhat tainted from the beginning. That puts up some cautionary reactions just because of the term artificial. And same with the metaverse. It wasn't very much in cultural vernacular beyond science fiction. So I think that again is somewhat of the hope, is to demystify, decode what the metaverse really is. And back to your point about Neil Stevenson, that initial vision of the metaverse was very much anchored on VR. And throughout the book, I offer that is just one on-ramp into
Yes.
the metaverse. There's
Yes.
many
I
points.
mean, you cover everything in terms of, if I recall, VR, augmented reality, and then you've got a
Mixed reality.
Mixed reality. That's it. Yeah. So I want to ask you a couple of questions. Move from the book to ask you some questions about metaverse. I've got a metaverse expert, so I'm going to ask. So at the moment with the metaverse, we have lots of metaverses, but none of them seem to be compatible with each other. Whereas when we have the when I go and buy a toaster and some bread, it doesn't matter what bread I put in. The toasters are all the same. They're all compatible.
Yeah.
So what are we going to do with this? How are we going to overcome this incompatibility?
It's a great foundational billion-trillion-dollar question. So essentially, I try not to define what the metaverse is. I looked at how a lot of emerging technologies define themselves, and I took great inspiration from the Phoenix Project, which was a book a few years ago that was talking about DevOps. And they took the stance that it is such a new, fast-moving condition that rather than define it, because they knew it was going to expand and be redefined multiple times, they described it. And so I tend to try to describe the metaverse versus define it. But with that said, if I was pushed into a corner and had to give a sentence or two on what the metaverse is, I would simply state that it is the merging, the fusion of the digital and the physical world together for a more immersive experience. And so if we have that shared understanding what the metaverse is, that is where we can start to look into the needs of standardization to really implement that. I take a pretty hard stance that there is one metaverse with multiple worlds in the metaverse. similar to there's one internet, and there's multiple domains
Yes.
within the internet. I think that's a similar analogy we can make with the metaverse. To your point about interoperability, I think that is probably one of, if not the top topic within a lot of these standards. There's a few emerging metaverse standard associations popping up, rightfully so. And so if we look at standards from the past, if you look at different plugs, USBs, we see the benefit of universal agreement for standards. And I think we're going through a similar process in terms of what are digital assets, what is the universal standard format for digital assets, how can we create digital currencies that can transcend and cross and be interoperable for a greater, more immersive experience. So there's a number of different standards that are happening currently right now. In parallel, there's also the ethics conversations, the privacy conversations, the security conversations. So I encourage people who are creators, this is the gold rush of our time, but also to the engineers, the scientists, the researchers, this is the gold rush from a technology standpoint as well, because this is all happening, changing, evolving right before our very eyes. So I encourage everyone to jump into it right now. You can really have a great impact. There's that old technology phrase, with great power comes great responsibility.
And Spider-Man said that as well, I think, didn't he?
Yeah, interesting. And so I think that responsibility comes down to the individual, to organizations, to businesses, and to society as well. So I think it's a really interesting, exciting time to be a part of this.
So what also about this argument about centralization and decentralization, especially around organizations? I'm hearing a lot of talk about a move towards ecosystems and mergers of companies, or either from a decoupling things and becoming decentralized. Is this something that you're seeing, or am I missing the point here?
It's something I've been delving into, somewhat of a rabbit hole of the psychology of human nature to refer to extremes. I think we gravitate towards one or the other quite often. I don't know what the psychological pattern implication of that is, but quite often with technology, we describe it as a utopia or a dystopia future. And my thinking is it's more of a protopia future. And if you look at technologies of the past, you can really see that pattern where a protopia is incremental advancement of the technology and its impact on society and business. And I think with the metaverse, we're going to have a similar incremental kind of impact on that as well.
We're 2 minutes to go. We're nearly up to the 20 minutes. Chris, thank you so much for coming on. When we talked, and I just want you to make a comment on this, you said adverts are dead on arrival.
I think that advertising as we know it will not be represented in that way in the metaverse. And we can take some inspiration from when iOS first came out, and we saw the bookshelf was very much skeuomorphic, with kind of faux wood and representing kind of these different shelves for the books. And I think we're in a similar design aesthetic for the metaverse, where it's very skeuomorphic, where the meeting room or the community room has a desk with legs. And so I think we're evolving from, why would a desk in an environment with no gravity have legs? And I think that's a great metaphor for how we're approaching the metaverse, where we're somewhat applying old approaches to a completely different paradigm. And so we're going to flip the script in many ways. This is no longer about talking about how can we monetize people's time or attention, but rather how can we reward people's time or attention. It's no longer about how can we own the data. It's rather how can we share the data and so on. And so I think it, in multiple ways, will be really flipping the script and how we think and approach things going forward.
Yeah, I can't see how we can be in a situation where anything, we do whatever we can to ignore adverts nowadays. And I just think the movement of saying what we're going to do is take, well, adverts were invented back in 1930. So let's take 100-year-old technology and flip it into the metaverse. Really?
Yeah, that won't, yeah, that won't fly in the future. But the underlying premise of offering value and utility on a personalized level will really unlock future opportunities for brands and businesses going forward. So one aspect we talk about in the book is creating fandom in the metaverse, and you can do that through co-creation,
Mm.
which is somewhat of a scary proposition for a brand to give up ownership of their IP from a marketing brand perspective. But we're already seeing interesting use cases where when a brand unleashes the creative ability of its community, it creates this environment of fandom and really hardcore advocates for
And I
that.
think we're seeing the movement. What one of the things that TikTok and certain Instagram is doing is there's still a lot of people using influencers as a way of basically advertising, but there's also people that are starting to use that fandom as a way of reaching out to people. At the end of the day, this is part of it is having a conversation, isn't it, between the brand and the customer?
Yeah. Yeah, and so that is very early days from a marketing standpoint, and there's been some, hits and some misses, and I think to your point about the influencers, on a similar level, we've gone through that, and these are all, again, incremental advancements on how we're entering this new dawn of immersive experiences.
Chris, thank you so much for coming on. The 20 minutes go so quickly. I could talk to you all day about this. Just to remind people, Chris has got a new book out. I'm sure it's available on Amazon worldwide, and I highly recommend it.
Thank you, Tim.
It's as I said, it's everything you need to know about the metaverse. As I say, I'm no metaverse expert, but I've kind of done okay, I think, in the conversation I've had with you, Chris.
I appreciate it.
So Chris, where can people find you?
ChrisDuffey.ai. Please check out the blog section. I try to keep that updated with the latest and greatest of new emerging opportunities and technology.
Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom and talking about your book. Thank you for coming on. It's just one of those things where I'm going to go and give you a 5-star review on Amazon.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you. And keep in touch.